And the man responsible was the President of the United States, who was also a Freemason.
The Great Seal's placement on the dollar bill is quite an extraordinary story.
Secretary of Agriculture Henry A. Wallace, later Vice President Wallace, has taken credit for the suggestion that led to putting the Great Seal on the back of the $1 bill.
Henry Wallace was a high-ranking Mason. He also had a lifelong interest in mysticism and the occult. He came across a book about the history of the Great Seal and was struck by the image of the reverse, which he had never seen before.
He saw this pyramid in the eye in a triangle, and since he was a student of symbolism, and he had a guru, he had a teacher who pointed at this symbolism as being enormously important for the United States of America, and also he was a Freemason.
This guru or teacher was a mysterious figure named Nicholas Roerich.
Nicholas Roerich was a Russian mystic and an artist. And he traveled widely, especially in the 20s, to various nations that he felt that Lord Jesus Christ traveled in. His interest was making contact with Christ and trying to determine when Christ was going to return.
Roerich came to New York for a period in the 1920s, and it was then he met Wallace.
I think he had extraordinary influence over Wallace. Roerich, when you look at his paintings, you begin to understand this guy was a multiple genius. To be just around a person like that has to affect your consciousness and help you see meanings for things.
There was much public disapproval for this relationship, and in later years, Wallace was ridiculed when letters he wrote to Roerich, referring to him as guru, were made public.
This became very embarrassing later on to FDR and Henry Wallace because they were trying to say basically that Nicholas Roerich also served as a spy and was a communist. Roerich, strangely enough, after he inspired Wallace, who inspired FDR, finally gets to the point where he is no longer welcome because of his spiritual beliefs.
But through Roerich's teachings, Wallace well understood the importance of symbolism as an effective means of communication. And as a Freemason, he was struck by the image of the pyramid with the all-seeing eye above it.
It is possible that Franklin and Wallace, as Freemasons, were familiar with the all-seeing eye as a symbol of God because they had looked at Renaissance drawings or paintings where it's used.
But conspiracy theorists think there's much more to it than that.
The Masons have to conceal their hidden agenda, their secret agenda for the United States. And so they offer the explanation that it was available in books of symbolism, that people were aware of these, and that's where they come from. And I don't believe that's true at all.
But beyond the familiar all-seeing eye, Wallace saw in one of the mottos a reflection of his president's administration.
Henry Wallace felt it was of some value that the Novus Ordo Seclorum meant the new order of the ages, meaning the New Deal. And so he went to President Roosevelt and asked that they adopt it.
The banks closed. President Roosevelt taking financial measures against the Depression. Social Security founded as he instituted a series of New Deal reforms.
The New Deal was the name given to a series of programs introduced by President Roosevelt during the Great Depression, with the aim of social reform and stimulating economic recovery.
And confidence is growing on every side.
Wallace saw the meaning of it, could easily interpret it because he was a member of a secret society, goes to FDR and says, hey, look at this. I mean, this tells the story of who we are and what we're doing and what we should be doing in the future.
Having discovered the reverse of the Great Seal had never been used, Wallace suggested to Roosevelt that they put it on a coin. In fact, Roosevelt decided instead that both sides of the Great Seal should be put on the $1 bill.
It's interesting that President Roosevelt personally approved the design. Roosevelt often had influence on the final design of projects, whether money or stamps or architecture, and in this case he reviewed the final version and had an input and made some small revisions.
Are the conspiracy theorists right this time about the power of the Masons?
Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Henry Wallace are two of the most prominent Masons that have been members in the United States. Roosevelt is one of our 14 presidents that were members of the Masonic fraternity.
You really do have what you could call a conspiracy on the Great Seal as it's found on the back of the $1 bill. And they did believe it was Freemasonic.
So despite being at the root of so much dispute, the symbolism hidden on the unused reverse of the Great Seal made it onto the dollar bill through the actions of Henry Wallace and one of the most powerful Freemasons of all time, the 32nd President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Conspiracy theorists believe it is a covert declaration of intent from the Freemasons.
And they don't want you to know what those symbols are. They're not going to make it public because it's a conspiracy. The goal of the Masons is to lead the world into the New World Order. The American people, in fact, the people of the world, will never be given a chance to vote on this or to decide. We are going to get the New World Order without vote, without decision by us. And so they've got to keep it secret.
They believe the Freemasons among the Founding Fathers were concealing a message in the Great Seal, and it was one that was seen and understood by Wallace and Roosevelt. But Freemasons deny any malicious intent.
For whatever reason, they may have thought it as an appropriate symbol of God. That's not a bad idea to remind the citizens that God oversees everything they do when they pull out the dollar bill.
Certainly, while historians agree that the Freemasons did play a central role in the birth of America and have continued to hold positions of power ever since, with 14 known Masonic presidents, they find no evidence of the plot for world domination.
The anti-Masonic ideas that come about, especially from the 1770s onwards, are put about by fundamental Christians, by people who believe that these people were intrinsically anti-Christian, when actually most of them were very good Christians indeed, and would have thought of nothing more disturbing than actually being called, heretics or blasphemers. And I think that a lot of this has got to do with that fear of the unknown, if you like.
And the images on the back of the dollar bill are there because the Founding Fathers successfully managed to create a lasting symbol that represented the United States to the rest of the world.
The design of the Great Seal has stood the test of time because it was a good piece of design. It worked. If it wasn't, they would have changed it, and they haven't. It personified what America was in the middle of the 18th century, and it has personified what America is today. So it works. It's iconic. You've got the dollar bill, and you've got Camel cigarettes, and you've got Coca-Cola, and you've got America.
There seems little doubt that the imagery of the dollar bill holds important clues to the way in which America's political leaders viewed the fledgling republic and its future in the world. And the vision embodied in that imagery has been inspirational to many. But whether this was ever part of some broader Masonic conspiracy remains a mystery.